Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Mikhail Peters. Today I want to talk to you about NASA interviews because I think this is actually useful information to know, and I'm fortunate that during the time that I applied to NASA and started interviewing for NASA, I already had a friend working there who was able to help me with the interview process. I then went on to help one of my friends who was an intern at NASA, and I kind of coached him, I guess, or mock interviewed with him, and then he was able to get into NASA after I worked with him. So I'm not saying this makes me the most credible person, but as somebody who's gone through the process and has talked to other people who have gone through the process and know what their interview experience was like, I'm here to shed some light on what that looks like. And it is quite in contrast with, for instance, the job I have now, where I work for an analytics company where I would say our biggest department is engineering with a lot of software engineers, and I support analytics, so I work a lot more with data science or just business analytics specifically, which is what I studied. I actually work with business intelligence. And that interview was a lot different because it was probably the first and last so far, since I'm still working there, interview where I had to display knowledge of my skills. I know that's very common for computer science interviews, like software engineer jobs. And while I don't exactly do that, I did have to talk about, if you were given this problem with this sort of data set, how would you then solve this problem? And for me, that was very nerve-wracking, also due to the fact that I had to go through 2 rounds of interviews, which I didn't for NASA. So that was kind of scary, but I made it through. And honestly, I'm going to say that working for NASA or interviewing with NASA was not as, scary as that. So I did talk about in my All About NASA video how I actually interviewed with a NASA center 4 separate times. The first time I didn't take the offer because I'd already committed to another job for the summer and I didn't want to go back on my word. For the second time, I decided I didn't want to be out in California in the desert. And for the third time, they actually did not end up accepting me, and for that reason, I kept applying, and I remember I was getting pretty desperate at that point, and I ended up working in Houston at Johnson Space Center, and I really wanted to be either there or in Maryland at Goddard, and at first they rejected me, which was very sad, but then eventually a couple weeks later they got back to me and told me that they wanted me, so I guess somebody had dropped out. And I remember asking them why I wasn't selected initially, and they said veterans preference. So it's another thing to keep in mind, is there are all these different scoring criteria, and because it is the government, people who have that sort of government affiliation already, like veterans preference, served in the military, that's very common that they're going to get first dibs a lot of times. Talking with a lot of different astronauts, or at least listening to a lot of different astronauts talk, what you begin to learn is that a lot of them join the military to learn how to fly, because flying is an expensive hobby or, skill that you would develop. And obviously when you're an astronaut, you're flying. So there's that. Okay. So anyway, going back to what is this actual interview process like? Well, it's not very technical, which I believe it's something like 75% of people at NASA are engineers and 25% are business people. That was me. And a lot of it has to do much more with behavior. So it's more of a behavioral interview. I think this is common with a lot of government type of interviews. I've interviewed for other government positions that are not NASA related, and actually, I would say that they're probably a little bit less behavioral based, because at this point I actually already do have experience. So, selecting interns is a little bit different because there's the assumption a lot of times that they don't have a lot of experience, and I felt like I was drawing a lot more on my experience as a student and all the extracurriculars that I had, rather than, okay, this is what I've done in a work setting, even though I had previous internship experience before I went to NASA. Not a lot, but some. So a lot of these behavior questions are more like related to, I'm sure everybody who, is in academia hears this a lot, like being a leader is very important and being well-rounded is very important. And I know in the US we show well-roundedness by being involved in clubs and also by, being involved in sports teams. So I did club sports a lot while I was studying at a university, and I guess that helped. But one of the stories that I would always tell, and this is one of the things that I encourage everybody to do, is, well, you have to come up with a story where you are being a leader, and it does not necessarily have to be within the realm of a club or an ordained position of leadership. So the primary story I would tell is that I transferred to a 4-year university. I actually went to a community college for 2 years, and when I got to the 4-year university, I found it very challenging initially because the rigor of academics was a lot higher than that at the community college, which makes sense. It's very natural and normal. And because I felt like I needed help in classes and I wasn't really sure of where I could go for help, like for instance, I used to go to math lab to get help with math when I was at community college, but when I was studying at the 4-year university, they did have teaching assistants, but sometimes I felt like that wasn't enough. And because I'm a somewhat sociable, outgoing person, I started making friends with different kids in my classes and then getting us all together and having study groups. So I was very good at orchestrating these study groups, getting everybody together, and what I found was that a lot of times when one person didn't understand one concept, a lot of times another person would, and you were able to support each other by getting up there and almost teaching the other students. So we would pull up our review documents, especially when we had an exam coming up. I would say a lot of times it was right before exam time, but sometimes we would do it also when we had assignments that we were working on together. And I felt like this was a way that I felt very, motivated, or like a sense of camaraderie with my classmates, because we were all trying to do something difficult together and working together to achieve a goal of doing well on the exam and passing our classes. So while it may sound like, okay, well, anybody could do that, yes, but the idea that I took initiative to do this thing and that I was displaying leadership while doing it is a very good example. One of the other things too that I had going for me, and I wouldn't say that this is common, but I was interested in NASA already because my one friend who, did help me and coached me personally, she had been working there and she allowed me to come shadow at NASA while I was still at community college, so prior to me even entering a 4-year university. And I had to wait like a whole semester at my 4-year university so that I could have a GPA there, because that needed to be considered before I could even start applying to NASA. So as soon as I could, I would apply. Like I said, I'd go on USA jobs.gov, yes, every day and see if there was a Pathways internship opportunity open, and anytime there was, and it was somewhat related to what I did, I would apply to it. Whether it was HR, whether it was information technology, whether it was business, I applied to all of them. And actually, within the realm of all those different things I just listed, I interviewed with each of them. Harley is being fidgety today, so I'm going to move him over here. Okay. So, in line with that, I understand not everybody has the opportunity to speak to their experience of working at NASA and why they want to work there. Because the thing I would talk about is, I met a lot of engineers, because in part that whole experience was to try and convince me to switch my major to engineering. I did consider doing it, however, I never did because of the opportunities that got presented to me scholarship-wise. And I found business analytics and I liked that just fine, so I decided to stick with that. And it's fine now. I have a job I like with it, so I don't have any regrets or qualms with that. So something I would talk about is that, I talked to all these engineers and I'm like, were you always really good at math and science? And then a lot of them would be like, either yes, or I always liked it at least, or both. And I was like, so, that made me a little bit hesitant because I did have some struggles with math growing up. And although I do question how much this is valid versus, because I'm a woman, and then my dad also telling me that I was bad at math from a young age, which is sad, and apparently this does happen. But anyway, I think I struggled with reading comprehension just as much as I did with math, so it's a toss-up, to be honest. But I was like very intimidated by, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not good enough at math to be able to become an engineer. But what stuck with me was how passionate everybody was about their job at NASA, and that was something that I wanted to be able to share in one day. And that's what I talked about a lot in my interviews, was having that experience and how impactful it was and how I remember that feeling, and I wanted to be able to be around that feeling. And yes, working at NASA was amazing, especially when you get to talk to all these different engineers. Like, a lot of them really do feel like working at NASA is their dream job, and there are a lot of people who are very passionate about it. And I mean, yeah, it was amazing to be able to have that experience, be in that environment. I met so many cool different interns from all over the country. I still keep in touch with quite a few of them, and yeah, I mean, it was an amazing experience. So, I would talk about that in my own personal interview. And, those are the two things I primarily remember talking about, was the passion that I saw with other people when I was there, I would also talk a little bit about Russian and how I studied that because I saw that it was somewhat of use at NASA, even though, like I said, I don't think that that was a very big selling point. And then I would talk about how I would orchestrate these group activities and maybe the extracurriculars I was involved in and trying to balance everything. And then a lot of times I think it's a format where it's like problem resolution. It's like problem action resolution. I think that's the exact order that it goes in. Now, that's my experience, but like I said, I did help my one friend with his interview, and the way that that went was, I'm asking him all these questions. I actually like have a list of questions that are, you know, similar to what you'd be asked, and I'm going through them, and at some point I deviated away from that, and I'm like, tell me like why you do want to work at NASA. Like, pretend this isn't an interview anymore. Like, what is it that makes you want to work there? And I come to find out that he had started this rocketry committee independently in his high school because he wanted it and he saw a need for it. He saw an opportunity that other people would be interested in it, and he went ahead and did that. And I was like, wow, this is such an amazing story that demonstrates your leadership capability and your passion for engineering and space. And like, where has this story been? This is gold. This is exactly what you need to talk about in your interview. And then eventually we were able to, like, every question I would ask, he could link it back to that. And to me, that was the story that he needed to ultimately be selected for his full-time job, which he was. And to be honest, I think that anybody who has that strong of a desire to work at NASA usually has some sort of motivating factor behind why. For me, it was going there and seeing how passionate everybody was and feeling like I wanted to be a part of that, and like really reaching for the best opportunity that you can get. And with this guy, he had this particular story, and I think that, again, anybody who wants to get a job at NASA probably does have that particular story, but you need to figure out what that is for you. And if you haven't developed it yet, then go out and figure out how to make one. I think taking on leadership opportunities doesn't have to even be restricted to an academic setting, like in a school or in a university. You could be doing that in your own community. You could be almost displaying what I call the entrepreneurial mindset, in that you see a need for something and you create a solution, and you create a community, get a group of people involved, and execute the thing that needs to be done to provide a solution for whatever the need is. And I feel like I've, gone on to do this in other aspects of my life. I'm really into selling things online, like Facebook Marketplace and stuff. I did talk about that in my hobbies video. But, that's a market need. And a lot of this is, looking at it from a business perspective. However, business is an important part of making money, which everybody needs to live and survive, unfortunately. That's how it is. So I hope this was interesting. I know I didn't go super detailed into it, and I am also really happy to talk more in depth about this one-on-one with people who are actually trying to apply to NASA, and I would encourage you to reach out to me. My email is provided on my channel. I know I have been getting a lot of emails about very random things and ideas for videos, so I do appreciate that. But yes, anybody who's trying to figure out how to get in, I'm more than happy to help, because I do feel like that experience was very impactful, transformational, exciting. I remember when I got the call that I was going to work at NASA, it was like one of the happiest days of my life. I actually started crying. So it means a lot to people. And I remember the HR guy who called me, he's like, I love making these calls because people are so happy. And yeah, it's amazing, and it's a great thing to share with other people, that kind of accomplishment of getting in. And it's not just like, okay, yes, it is a job after a while, and I do explain that, but I was exposed to so many cool things, like getting to meet astronauts, getting to be in an environment where I was always being challenged to learn more. That's one of the things I like about my job now. They also have a very strong culture of learning, and I think that's valuable, because I think that's what keeps people, setting goals ahead of themselves, and I think that that's very important to emotional and mental well-being. So I hope that this is helpful to somebody. Again, encourage you to reach out, and I want to make also probably other videos about other things that I've accomplished, like getting a Boren scholarship and getting a Fulbright scholarship, because I am very fortunate that I had a lot of resources and people to reach out to help me with that. However, I don't believe that that information is readily available enough that everybody has access to it. So I would be also very happy to speak on those topics as well, and hope that the people who are searching for that advice and information will be able to find it here on my channel. All right, well, thank you everybody, and have a nice day until my next video tomorrow.